Have you ever tried to organize, well, just about anything? Your bookshelf, maybe your music playlists, or even just the files on your computer? We have this, fundamental human need to create order out of chaos. But what happens when that chaos isn't just a messy room, but the entire living world? Well, today, let's dive into this surprisingly elegant system we've developed to turn that biological chaos into, basically, a library of life. So our planet is just absolutely teeming with life. I mean, from the deepest parts of the ocean to the highest mountains, organisms have adapted to fill every single niche you can imagine. It's this beautiful, absolutely breathtaking variety. But if you're a scientist trying to understand it all, it's also a monumental challenge. Just get a load of this number: millions of species. And remember, that's not every single living thing, that's just the number of types of organisms that we've managed to identify so far. The scale of it is almost impossible to really wrap your head around. And that, right there, brings us to the central question. When you're faced with this staggering diversity, how do you even begin to study it, to understand it, or even just to talk about the living world in a way that isn't complete and utter chaos? This sheer abundance of life creates what you could call the problem of plenty. Now, it's a great problem to have, don't get me wrong, but from a scientific point of view, you gotta have a solution. You can't just start observing things at random and hope for the best. I mean, imagine your job was to learn about every single one of those millions of species individually, memorizing the unique traits of every different beetle, every type of fungus, every little single-celled organism. It's a recipe for complete burnout. Yeah, you'd get absolutely nowhere. It would be an impossibly confusing task, and you'd never, ever be able to see the bigger picture. It's kind of like trying to understand a library by reading every single word in every book, but in no particular order. It just doesn't work. So what did we do? Well, we did what humans do best when we're faced with overwhelming complexity. We created a system. We developed a method to bring some order to all this beautiful biological chaos. And that system is called classification. It's a really simple but incredibly powerful idea. All it is grouping organisms together based on what they have in common and what makes them different. This lets us study them not as millions of scattered individuals, but as organized groups. So, why is this so critical? Why is this simple idea of grouping things so important? Well, it turns out it has 5 incredibly powerful benefits that make it absolutely essential for biology. Okay, here they are, the big 5. Classification helps us manage the sheer volume of life. It lets us see the connections between different organisms. It helps us create clarity with universal names. It lets us predict traits. And ultimately, it lets us study biology in a systematic way. So let's explore a couple of the most fascinating examples of this in action. One of the coolest things classification does is reveal the family tree of life. It's not just about putting things into boxes. It's about understanding which boxes are next to each other. It reveals these deep evolutionary connections, a tree whose branches we're still mapping out, and sometimes even redrawing as we make new discoveries. For instance, take a lion and a tiger. Obviously, they're different species, but because they share so many fundamental traits, we classify them together in the same genus, Panthera. And that simple grouping immediately tells us that they share a really close common ancestor. Okay, let's move on to another huge benefit: clarity. If I say the word gopher, what am I talking about? A rodent? A snake? A tortoise? Well, it completely depends on where you live. Common names are a total mess, and science needs precision. And this right here illustrates the solution perfectly. The plant many people call neem has countless other local names all over the world. But to a scientist anywhere, doesn't matter if you're in Tokyo, Cairo, or Rio de Janeiro, it is Azadirachta indica. One name. Zero confusion. It's the universal language of biology. Now, this next one feels a little bit like having a superpower. Just by knowing which group an organism belongs to, we can make incredibly accurate predictions about it, even if we've never seen that specific creature before in our lives. So, for example, let's say a new creature is discovered, and scientists classify it as a mammal. Right away, we can predict with very high certainty that it's going to have hair or fur, and that the females will produce milk for their young. We know this before we even examine it closely. That is the predictive power of a good system. So when you pull it all together, you really start to see the true power of this whole idea. Classification takes the overwhelming, chaotic, beautiful diversity of life and it transforms it into an organized, understandable, and meaningful structure. And that really is the big takeaway here. The entire goal is to make studying life simpler and more systematic. By creating this order, we create a framework that allows us to ask better questions and hopefully find more meaningful answers. And that leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? This process of sorting, grouping, and naming, it's not just for biology. Isn't this the very first step to truly understanding anything new? Whether it's a new subject you're learning, a new skill, or even a new idea, maybe the first step is always to classify.